All right, good morning, Chairperson and members, Garrett Vollendroff, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thanks, Dusty. Good morning, everybody. We'll convene the Board Caucus meeting for Tuesday, February 6th, 2024. We're going to make one quick amendment to the agenda after our legislative update. We're going to get a quick update on our actions around enforcement of the lewd conduct regulation. But first up is Mark Webster for a legislative update. Morning.
Good morning, Chairperson and members Vollendroff and Garrett. It's day 30 of session. We are somehow already at the halfway point. Fiscal cutoff was yesterday, so the volume of bills that are technically still alive and that we're following was cut substantially at midnight. Among the bills that didn't move through are those bills that would redirect portions of the dedicated cannabis account, moving the portion that currently goes to the general fund to local government is in one proposal, or for healthcare reimbursement rates in another. Those didn't move along. Our agency request bill didn't need to go through a fiscal committee, so we didn't have to sweat through the marathon executive sessions that both the House and the Senate fiscal committees had yesterday. Instead, the House version, House Bill 2260, is on the floor calendar now, having been pulled from rules. So that's very, very good to see. Haven't seen the Senate counterpart move onto the floor calendar, but there's still time for that. Both chambers will be on the floor for the rest of the week, so we won't have any committees meeting. Just most of the day, each day, both House and Senate will be on the floor passing all the bills that have come out of those fiscal committees. The adult entertainment bills are still moving, and while they're different, we heard from the sponsors in each chamber yesterday and know that they're trying to coordinate, I think, as best they can. As you all know, I think there's interest from many in the legislature to have that bill direct rulemaking on the lewd conduct WAC. And it sounds like we may have rulemaking on that open, if and when the bill passes. We just need to keep our eyes on the moving pieces here. If we create an exemption from the lewd conduct WAC for an endorsement, as an example, and then the legislature repeals it, we're going to need to rethink the mechanics of that. All of these problems are solvable, to be clear, and I think they're not even real problems if we stay in communication and if the bill is very specific and gives us clear direction. The high-potency THC bills have also changed quite a bit and are now coming out of the fiscal committees. So both the House and Senate version are still alive. So I think we're going to be involved, and we're trying to make sure that our research group can help us navigate this or help be involved in any of the studies that come out of those bills. The lab accreditation bill, this is the bill that moves lab accreditation from ecology over to agriculture, passed the PROPs. And they were able to fix a problematic amendment from the policy committee. So that was very, very good to see. So we're all good on House Bill 2151. There's a lot of back and forth on the language in the biometric age verification bill regarding consumer privacy and civil rights. More to come on that one. I was in a meeting with the Attorney General's office and the advocates for that bill. There's a whole lot going on the legal side. We just want to make sure that it's enforceable, whatever comes out is enforceable, if we're doing compliance checks and the like. I'm pretty confident that we'll get there, but there's still a whole lot of debate around consumer privacy, mostly on that one. We have another forecast on revenue and then also caseloads next week, which would mean that we're likely to get budget proposals on or around Monday the 19th, so a little less than 2 weeks away right now. And then there'll be a very, very fast sprint to the finish after that. And that's all I have. Any questions?
On the lab accreditation bill, the fix, was that to that enforcement piece that we...
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, where they had taken out some language that talked about if a sample failed, then you destroy the lot it came from. They did add some clarification around there that points to the rule and the process that we already have, but okay. We certainly didn't want to remove that section in its entirety. So pretty good fix, and they worked with both us and agriculture on it. So good process as well.
Good. Appreciate that. Member Vollendroff.
Hey, Mark, you mentioned changes to the high THC concentration bill. Was that essentially just moving them to a steady? Is when you talk about changes, is that what you were talking about? And is there opportunity for us to still influence the studies, or is that done at this point?
No, I think there's definitely still time. Both bills are fairly different. So what happened in the House was they removed the provision that created the age gate You
Yeah.
had to be 25. But the study is still open. I think it's just not directed to the University of Washington. It's more open. The Senate actually has two bills on this topic. The first one was more of a study bill directing us to participate in a study looking more closely at the tax solution. Like what would a differential tax rate do,
Right.
and what would it look like? Their version of the high THC bill delays the implementation of the age gate until after that study comes in.
Mm.
So they're not moving off of the age gate necessarily, but they're wanting to wait to implement it and get some new information in the meantime.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. Anything else? Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
We will, I'm going to turn over to Director Will Lucella, and Enforcement Education Director Chandra Wax is here too, of course, and they're going to just give us an update on the announcement that we put out Thursday evening, I guess it was, about action around the enforcement of lewd conduct, and give an opportunity for board members to ask any questions. So, Will.
Good morning, Chair Postman, board members Garrett and Vollendroff. Just going to provide you with a quick update on the letter. As Chairman said, we paused the lewd conduct enforcement, paused the jet participation. With regard to the rule violations, the impacted licensees have been notified that there will be no citations or violations issued. The rulemaking you're going to hear, it's the next agenda item. So we'll move past that. Let's see, legislative engagement. So we're continuing to meet with legislators. Staff, myself, have met with some legislators on Friday, including the LGBTQ plus caucus. And we'll continue engagements with legislators and committees. See, agency review. Yep, we're continuing to look at our past practices, policies. I'll have Chandra, if you want to talk about the photographs and where we are with that.
Yeah, we've ensured that the photographs will not be released in anything resembling their original form. They will be completely redacted.
Okay. And then would you also talk about the engagement thus far with the LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, we've had a wonderful, actually very positive and supportive response from our LGBTQ plus community partners. Many individual members who have gotten together just to talk about their response and how actions make them feel, and just sort of providing an education for those of us that aren't part of the community. And that's been very helpful as we navigate a path forward. In addition, we've included our own agency DEIB manager in those conversations. We've met with Equity Washington, one of our LGBTQ plus commissioners, and had some great conversations. And we'll continue to have great conversations along the way. And just as we think we have an answer or a solution or an action, making sure that our intent through that action is how it is received in the community as well.
That'll be really important, more difficult as the session gets closer to the end and things could be changing, hour to hour. So whatever we can do to just have that open line it'd be great. So, okay. Any other updates from your side on that?
I would just say we've begun to look for options for our LGBTQ plus awareness training. Our academy has an offering in that area. I've also met with many of our impacted employees and command teams, some of which are members of the LGBTQ plus community and some of which are not, just to talk through how we take care of everyone moving forward.
How was it?
Very insightful. I think that many people, feelings are a roller coaster sometimes. And so some days I would come into those meetings and people would say like, thank you, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your responsiveness. And other days I would come in and I would sit for an hour and listened to somebody that was very angry. And I think we learned from all of those conversations. So I've had lots of conversations.
That's good. And we'll be meeting with employees this afternoon.
That's correct. Yep, we're going to be meeting with staff this afternoon and doing some of the same listening sessions.
Okay, great.
Holly has a question.
Member Garrett?
First, I just want to say thank you, Director Lucella and Chandra for the update. I think that you guys are doing a great job listening and with the response, like I mentioned in our earlier presentation with license. I think that that's very important because certain things just bring up a relived experience for people that sometimes we are not aware of. A couple of questions I have, going back to pause of JET. Is that something that is ongoing and something we have to participate in? How is that done and determined?
Part of our mission is to partner with our communities and partner with law enforcement in each of our jurisdictions across the state. And so that partnership is part of that work and part of being informed about the things that are going on in that neighborhood as far as being partnered with Seattle PD goes. And also some of that is about just awareness and safety and working together. And so is that a required partnership for us? No. But it has brought to our attention that prior to moving forward, we need to define how we will engage with that team and those teams. So for example, one of the things we heard is the number of participants or the number of employees or officers and employees that made entry was problematic. And so that's one of the things we can talk about moving forward is how many people will make entry into each establishment if we are to re-engage with JET. One of the things I will say is these partnerships across the state are very important to the work we do at the LCB because we need to be engaged with those other police departments and fire marshals and code enforcers because A, we're in their jurisdiction, and B, we need them in supporting the licensees so we can get all of the questions answered and ensure compliance all around.
And sometimes just for literal backup.
Yeah, it is an officer safety issue too.
Is the city, sorry, go ahead. Holly, did you have more?
Okay, your response, because I had several questions, but go ahead.
I just want one question about that. So the city has also paused JET, is that right? Or did they just hold off for now? Do you know what their status is?
I don't know that.
Okay, okay.
I think their initial plan, I shouldn't speak for JET.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So Ollie, before you ask, can I ask just a related question to JET before you ask your rest of your questions?
Okay.
So Director Wax, I again thank you for your update, and our relationships with local authorities is critical to the work we do. Clearly, I would like to ask, and obviously it's not my decision. I think that you guys will make a thoughtful decision. But before moving back completely with the direction of partnering with JET, I'd like an update and hear about what has changed if we decide to continue to go out with them. What conversations took place? What has changed about those visits and how it might look different in the future? I would really appreciate that.
That's a great point. Yeah.
It'd be my pleasure.
And the other question I had is when we go out to do these going out to visit our licensees, how do we determine what areas and how that's being done? Do we stay in one area or do we do downtown Seattle, here, there? Are we spread it? How is that determined?
There are a lot of things that factor into that decision. I'll share some of them with you. For example, some of it is geographical. So in the Capitol Hill area neighborhood, for example, sometimes you're parking and walking quite a ways to get to the licensee establishments. And so many times when an officer is making their plan for the evening, they'll look at the geographical location where they're at. They'll also look at complaints we've received that they need to follow up on, or questions they've received from licensees and emails that they want to come in and touch base on, or even some solution planning they'd done earlier in the month or weeks before that they're following up with and just touching base on. They will also look at, I think I talked about complaints, the geographical area. Sometimes, so we have a requirement in enforcement that a certain number of night hours are worked or a certain number of after hours checks are done to make sure that we're visiting our licensee establishments all hours. And so sometimes when you're making your kind of plan for the evening, you also have to consider who's going to be open during that time. Also, there are requests that come to licensing for special events that we are notified of. And so if there's a special event that looks like it's higher risk, i.e. a lot of people or in a very interesting location, then we will sometimes include those in our plans. I don't go out in the field other than when I'm accompanied by an officer. And so they make the plan for me. So I would love to allow you to hear from an officer on those types of things. But in general, those are some of the things that are considered when deciding which locations to visit.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Quick call on that one. Does each officer make that kind of work plan for the evening on their own, or is that done with command staff or?
They make their plans. Sometimes they will have another partner that goes out with them. So say you'll have two officers in areas that are close to one another that both have some complaints to follow up on. Sometimes they'll team up for night hours and do those complaints together. Our lieutenants and captains are aware when our officers are working, and they post where they're going to be, and that's accessible, but it's not necessarily something that has to be approved.
Right. Okay. And how many officers do we have on the alcohol side?
I'd have to get back to you with that. It's a constantly moving number, so I'll get that number for you.
Okay, it's not a problem. Okay. Member Volendra?
So sounds like there may in fact be situations where we visit a licensee more than we would other people because of a variety of factors. And it makes a lot of sense to me if we've got reported problems or history and that kind of thing. We heard during testimony a number of comments about disproportionate contact with some of the LGBTQ specific establishments. And I'd like an update on what is the plan moving forward to evaluate and put in front of us numbers so that we can actually see that. And I'm also curious, this is not a Seattle-centric problem, or this is not a Seattle-centric concern, even though it happened in Seattle. We've got establishments that serve the LGBTQ community all over the state. So how are we going to identify other establishments around the state? And then what's the plan for getting us some numbers in front of us?
Thank you, board member. I will tell you that we've had some conversations with the person that shared the data and just kind of looked at the data that they have, just reaching out. We have a great relationship with that licensee, so we had some good conversations there. We're also going to pull data and send that over to our agency research team so that it can be evaluated, so we can look for equity and bias in those numbers and start making that determination. And then as far as one of the difficulties, and I think you mentioned it in your question, is that I can't just look at data and tell which establishments are LGBTQ plus frequented establishments. And so we have talked with members of our community and groups like our LGBTQ plus commission and Equity Washington about potentially helping us identify those, or not helping us because enforcement won't be doing the work, but helping the research team identify those locations so that we can properly evaluate the data.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, thank you for that update. And another issue that I would just like to get regular updates. Like I hear we're gathering the data, it's going to go to the research team. And if we could get regular updates on like the status of that, like, I don't know, are we talking a week, 2 weeks, 6 months? I mean, just trying to keep, things happen quickly. And I just want to keep that on the radar and would ask that on a regular basis, we are getting updates on the status of that until it's in front of us.
Yeah, once I hand that over to the research team, I'll ask Director Nordhorn to go ahead and make sure that the board is updated on the progress of that project.
Great, thank you.
And so you're saying though, in looking at the data, you're looking for all bias, not just one area of bias.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that's one of the questions that we haven't answered yet is exactly what are we looking at, how we're doing it? Because we have a question that I think, again, the one that Member Vollendorf used as the example about the northwest unit, right? That's what Bellingham on the rear is from anyhow. But then also, you and I have talked a little bit about, we also have the history of lewd conduct, ABNs, and how those came up. That's also going to be telling and could be telling in some way, and we should figure this out. So, and to what Member Garrett was just saying, like, and it is a big project all of a sudden. So and to the point of updates, like, so I just think we all need to have some conversation about, all right, here's what we're doing first. Because we could look at the lewd conduct violation history in a matter of days or a week, right? We go back 10 years and it's only going to be a handful, and we can look and tell you exactly what clubs they were and what the final adjudication was. And that to me, I think would be interesting. And so if we can bite something like that off, let's do it. But we can talk with Director Nordhorn.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that I'm not going to be leading or involved in that because I just want to eliminate the perception that there would be any bias on my part to evaluate the data in a certain way. I'd like to share two other things, if you don't mind. A response to you and your question about liquor officers. We have 138. That's including our deputy chiefs and command staff. Compliance checks. I want to tell a story about when over the past couple of years in enforcement and how we recognized, because of the geographical way in which we do our work, which makes a lot of sense. Sometimes it appears as though there is a bias in the day's checks, and we addressed that. So the way we do compliance checks used to be the same way we do premise checks, which is making a schedule and going out into a specific area. Also an area where we're following up on things. And we started doing a random selection of compliance checks. And so we go out and go to many different locations in the month to get our compliance checks done, which, as you know, is a completely different kind of check. But it is something we did proactively to address any perception of bias.
Have you found any different results since we did the random?
We have lower results in some of our industries, lower compliance.
Yeah. Member Vollendorf.
I think there's a reason for that too.
Director Wax, first of all, again, I want to thank you for the list of things that you have completed in a very short period of time. I think it's remarkable the swift action that your division or section took, and then to the director, Will. Acknowledging how quickly the organization responded. And to me, it's a testament of how government can respond quickly and in a responsive manner to a community that's concerned. And I hope, and I'm not implying that this isn't our history, but I'm hopeful that this is the way in which we operate when anything is brought to us. The LGBTQ community is not the only historically marginalized community. We have many communities that have the same history. And when I think of what we've done, at least in the time that I've been on the board around social equity and the complexities of it, I feel like we have done remarkable work in that area. That doesn't appear to always be the case in this particular area. And so I just bring that up. I am proud of the work that we've done. I think it's incredible. And I think that we owe that to the entire community, that when issues like this come up, that we act in that same expedient manner when we can. And I recognize that there are complexities given the legislature and RCWs, and that all situations need to be evaluated for their particular complexities. But I just want to recognize that I have heard multiple comments from the LGBT community, how grateful and thankful that they are and how much safer, excuse me, they feel as a result of our actions.
Thank you. Member Garrett?
Oh, Jim just said it all. But one final question, did on the comment of looking at previous AVNs pertaining to lewd conduct, are you saying, or were you saying, David or Chandra, we can take a look to see how many there have been over time, what they've been, and kind of evaluate the big picture of what it is we're looking at while we're making decisions on that subject?
100%. And it's something I've talked to Chandra about. We've looked at some of the more recent data. I think we need to go back a little further at Will's suggestion. And I don't think that's the whole story, because, you know, I think we want to see visits, enforcement, other things, all of those things to look for really true disproportionate. But I think my suggestion, we should start with a really detailed map of the history of lewd conduct enforcement, since that's what this is about. How many, where, what, how were they adjudicated? What clubs? They're not all LGBTQ clubs that have gotten those citations. But I'll bet.
Okay.
Yeah, so yes.
Thanks.
Okay.
Jim's talking.
Jim, you're talking, but you're muted again.
Sorry
You're
about that.
sparing us today since we had technical problems.
I was going to save this for the conversation about the rule request, but another piece of data that I would be interested in is, has there been rule petitions before related to this particular WAC? And what was the disposition of that?
Daniel will cover that. Yeah, he's hard. Daniel will cover that.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Okay. Remember, your hand's still up, Member Garrett. Is that just from before? Okay, all right. Anything else?
No.
Anything else? Hearing none? Okay, thank you both. Appreciate it. Thanks for all the work on this. I know it's not done yet, but really appreciate it. And here's Daniel Jacobs, our rules coordinator. He's going to brief us on where we're at with the piece of this, which is we said on Thursday that we would begin rulemaking on the lewd conduct regulation. And go ahead, Mr. Jacobs, and start where you want. But if you could, you and I talked about this yesterday, and the historic research you're doing, which I think would be useful for the other members to hear as well.
Certainly. I'm going to give my prepared remarks just because I've got a script all ready to go, and then I can go into the history and research I've been doing. So good morning, Chair Postman, members Garrett Vollendroff, Director Lucella, LCB staff, members of the public. I'm here to give a preview of what I'll be presenting to the board during next week's board meeting. I'll be requesting approval of a CR 101, which is the pre-proposal statement of inquiry, which is the first step in the rulemaking process required by Washington state law on rulemaking. On January 31st, we received 6 petitions for rulemaking that requested repeal of WAC 314.11.050, which is known as the lewd conduct rule. These petitions used pretty much identical language, and they all asked for the exact same thing, which is the immediate halt of enforcement of the lewd conduct rule and repeal of the rule. As we've mentioned, LCB has already halted enforcement of that rule. Under the Administrative Procedures Act, which is the Washington state law that governs how we as a state agency are supposed to go about creating, changing, and repealing regulations, when we receive a petition for rulemaking, we can either deny the petition and explain why we're denying the petition, or we can agree to begin the rulemaking process. We have 60 days from receipt of the petition to do one of those two things, which puts us on track to respond to this petition by March 31st. Because of the board's schedule, and that we, as an agency, take these actions only during board meetings, that means that the board needs to decide whether to reject or accept the petition by the March 27th board meeting. I'm not going to be making a recommendation as to whether the board should repeal the rule or amend it. This is something that's going to be decided over the course of the rulemaking process. If the board were to accept the petition for rulemaking, even though the petition asks for the rule to be repealed, it doesn't necessarily mean that the board has to repeal the rule. That may be what ends up happening, but that isn't necessarily required by virtue of accepting the petition. And especially in my role as the rules coordinator, it wouldn't be my place to predetermine that outcome. Regardless of whether we decide to repeal or change the rule, the first step is the same, which is filing the CR 101. Additionally, I want to make clear that regardless of what decision the board makes on the petition, the CR 101 is going to be presented on February 14th to the board. If approved at the February 14th meeting, a public comment period would be open until March 22nd. During this time, anyone can submit public comments in writing or email to the rules inbox, which is rules@lcb.wa.gov. The next step in the rulemaking process, again, regardless of whether we repeal the rule or amend it, is the same. It's coming up with proposed rule language in what is called the CR 102. When I talk about CR 101s, 102s, these are the names of the particular forms. Before the proposed rule language happens, it's our practice to circulate draft rule language through public emails and gov deliveries, and then hold public stakeholder engagement sessions so that we can hear feedback from the community and stakeholders on this proposed draft language. The earliest that we can file the proposed language is April 10th. That's because, again, the Administrative Procedure Act requires certain amounts of time to pass. And following the CR 101, the earliest that we can propose rule language is April 10th. Following that April 10th date, there's going to be another period of time for public comment. And again, this is all governed by the Administrative Procedures Act. And the earliest we could do a public hearing, which again would provide a formal public opportunity to for folks to testify and give their opinion on this proposed draft rule language, the earliest we could do this would be May 22nd. Assuming that, again, this goes according to schedule, the earliest we could adopt the final rule language then, in what's the CR 103, is June 5th. Because the rules become effective 31 days after filing, that means the earliest that we can have new rule language, and that means whether or not we change this rule or just repeal it entirely, the earliest we can do this via the traditional rulemaking format is July 6th. As I mentioned, this is the earliest we can do this via traditional rulemaking process. I'll be providing more details on this during next week's caucus and board meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can also respond. I know that Member Vollendroff had asked a question about prior history for petitions that we've received. I can just jump into that.
Why don't you do that, and then we'll take the other questions.
Sure. So we actually received a petition for rulemaking in 2021 from adult entertainment industry, asking that the lewd conduct rule be amended to allow for licensees to have adult entertainment at liquor licenses. Basically, it was the petition sort of similar to the bill to allow adult entertainment facilities to get liquor licenses. It wasn't asking for repeal of the rule, it was asking for amendment. And that petition was denied, and this was prior to my time at the agency, but essentially the reasons were sort of similar to what we've said publicly about the bill, which is that the LCB would prefer there to be some sort of legislative changes to allow for worker safety and the whole host of reasons that we've talked about previously. But again, that petition was about specifically allowing for adult entertainment and liquor permits.
And then also going further, you're diving into the archives to try to get the true history of how we ended up with this on the books. People talk about 2001. It actually predates that, and really trying to get back to the source as much as possible, right?
Yeah, so just to sort of explain that, so this rule was created in 2001. Well, created. It was put, so currently it's in 314.11.050, and that was put there in 2001. And that was put there because going back for Washingtonians, back when Governor Locke was the governor, he issued an executive order that was that referred to as the plain meaning order. He was basically, I think the idea was, and again, not to date myself, I was in elementary school at the time, but he was saying rules are too confusing. People don't understand them. People can't read them and understand what they actually mean. And so a whole bunch of agencies had to reorganize and redo how their rules were read. And as part of it, the LCB had to do a lot of changes. There were whole chapters that we had in one place that we needed to put into another. And at that period of time, that's when 314.11.050 was created. And the reason I'm using the air quotes is because really this used to be 314.16.125. And that rule actually was initially created in 1975. That's when we put in rules about lewd conduct, and a lot of the language about what body parts can and can't be shown, some of the terms for acts that are forbidden, some of them having biblical references, a lot of the wording that is the most sort of patently offensive comes from 1975 and hasn't been changed since that time. But the rule was changed in the early 80s and then again in the early 90s to add some exceptions for what was then called traditional ethnic dancing. And so I'm in the process of getting from the archives board meeting minutes from those meetings, because this was all done in compliance with what was then the Administrative Procedures Act. I will say they were allowed to do rulemaking a lot faster back then, for whatever it's worth, but that's because they didn't have to give as much time for folks to give public feedback. They would send out a letter and say, we're having a hearing next week, and then the week after, we're adopting this rule. So I'm in the process, because a lot of that stuff is archived with the Secretary of State. I'm in the process of acquiring that and sort of doing a deep dive to see how we got to the language that we currently have.
Member Garrett.
Yes, I want to go back to your discussion on opening the CR 101 and us receiving petitions. So I just want to make sure I'm the clarity. Opening and doing what we are already doing and opening the CR 101 is pretty much doing the same thing as the petitions are asking for, but we are getting a head start by doing it ourselves and opening the CR 101. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
But we could accept the petition today legally, right? We don't have to wait. So, I mean, really substantively, I'm not sure one or the other really matters on the timeline at this point, right? If we wait till March 27th, but we could accept the petition on the same day we approve the 101, right?
Yes, theoretically, we could accept the petition. We don't have to wait the 60 days. The statute just says that we have 60, that we need to respond by then. And if we accept the petition, then the next step is filing the CR 101. And so, yes.
Just a really unusual situation, because we've already said our intent, and then we've got different options, paths that we can follow. But Member Ballendorf?
Well, I was just going to say, I think given the fact that we've said we're not going to enforce this particular WAC, I want to hear public comment. I want to hear what the community has to say. I think we owe that not just to the LGBTQ community, but all community members to have opportunity to weigh in.
That happens regardless.
Right.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Will be public hearings and public comment period. I think the only, and Mr. Jacobs, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. At this point, substantively, there's no difference of whether we accept a petition or we approve a 101. We could do one first, one or the other. We can do both. We could do either. The same process then kicks in with mandatory public comment period, public hearings, 101, 102, 103. Right, Mr. Jacobs?
Yes, that's correct. I will say the one difference here is that when a petition gets denied for rulemaking, the statute requires that there is an opportunity for them to appeal that denial to the governor's office. So that is the one difference, is that in theory,
why we would deny them, but we'll get to that vote.
Sure. Yeah, but I did just want to clarify that in terms of procedurally, because we've said we're going to file the 101 either way. That is the one relevant difference, is that if we deny the petition and we say we denying the petition, we're already doing this. even so, they still have the right to appeal that denial of the petition to the governor's office, and that's in statute. And additionally, we can't just ignore the petition and say, well, we're doing this anyway, so we don't need to respond. By state law, we have to
60
respond.
days. It just
Exactly.
doesn't change the outcome of it, is all my point being. Member Vondra?
No, go ahead. I'll defer to Member Garrett. I think she had some other questions. Mine are.
Member Garrett, go ahead. Sorry.
Are you done, Ollie?
Yeah, I was done. I didn't know
Oh.
my hand was still raised.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
So, Daniel, thank you for the update. So a couple of things, and I apologize if the board members could bear with me. I, in a prior life, used to be a clinician, and in that role, I was what was called an assessment clinician for a period of time, meaning that I did evaluations on individuals who might have an alcohol problem, and it was my job to determine, based on information, whether that was in fact true. So I was in kind of a detective. So I actually have put on my detective hat in the last few days, and it's raised a few questions for me. And so I just wanted to ask Mr. Jacobson a couple of questions, or Jacobs a couple of questions, and then bring to light some suggestions that I have. So one is, I spent a great deal of time yesterday looking at the alcohol-related rules that govern our work. They are in need of an update. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We don't use gender inclusive language in a number of places in our WACs. We have some WACs that reference RCWs that in fact no longer exist. We have one WAC that points to bringing alcohol for private use from one state to another and needing to apply to the LCB to pay taxes. Well, I emailed our CFO yesterday, and she's looking into it, but my guess is we're probably not collecting taxes. So, but just being a point that was in a half an hour review. I imagine if we spent more time, we would actually find a number of things that we need to update. And so in also asking around, I think this has come up before, the need to update our rules regulating the work that we do. And I would ask that we consider dedicating the time and staff, even if it's a temporary position. I know our rules team is extremely busy, and it's probably one of the reasons this hasn't happened, is because rules come in, petitions come in, we're responding to things in the moment, and things like this don't get taken care of. So I'm just bringing that up as a suggestion that we spend some time and the resources to address the update to the WACs. The second thing is, in looking specifically at 050, and I think this is true in other areas, although I didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. At the bottom, of course, they always reference what the statutory authority is that gives us this, citing the RCWs that give us the statutory authority for that particular rule. And I can't find under 050 the WAC that gives us the statutory authority for this particular one. And so, Daniel, I'm wondering if you can point me to, what am I missing? What am I missing that I don't see that?
The RCW. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so the first thing I'll point out is that, so it has been practice, and you can find this in other regulations too, that because really what happens is that they put the statutory authority down there for the rule that being made. So our practice has been, our general rulemaking authority for alcohol is found at 6608030. So you'll find that listed in pretty much all alcohol related rules. And what they would also do is they would also just sort of throw in any other statute that relates to this rule. And that's because, not wanting to give legal advice here, but typically if the rule were to get challenged and go to court, those are the statutes that the judges would look at. And so they're like, well, we don't want you to just look at the regulation giving us rulemaking authority, also all these other ones. But typically, so 6608030 is our rulemaking authority over alcohol. There's also another statute, and this one is a very old one. It's 6698070. And that basically says that we have rulemaking authority to make any rule that is within the spirit of the Washington State Liquor Act, which is the 1933 law that, after Prohibition ended, that said basically the LCB can do something as long as it's not contrary to the spirit of the Liquor Act. And
The
so,
1933 law.
yes.
Which
And
has been
so
superseded by a citizens initiative, by the way. So, yeah.
it is, although the 6698-070 is still on the books, it's still an active statute. And I guess that's also part of it, is that because, as I mentioned, this rule used to be 314-16-125, and that rule was challenged previously by in courts, and prior courts had said that the LCB has the authority to make this rule, and they cited to some of these more generic rulemaking authorities. You know, they said stuff that the LCB has broad rulemaking authority over these areas, and sort of they said, well, this rule is within that broad rulemaking authority. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
You froze, Member Vollendorf. While we wait for you to return. Other questions, Member Garrett? Looks like you're back. Jim, go ahead.
Oh, I'm back. Okay. Well, thank you. Sorry. My comments about cleaning up the wax and getting things off there that are no longer relevant. Just thinking of the history of my community, the LGBTQ community, when the Supreme Court struck down the sodomy laws, there are states that kept that law on the books for a very long time. And it was harmful, it was hurt. Anyway, I just think that there are reasons for us to try to stay on top of and in front of these kind of changes in the law, and a review of our wax would do that. So again, just pointing back to the need to do that.
Yeah, and we don't want to put Mr. Jacobs on the hot seat there for that question, but, you know, yes, we're going to, you know, the director's talked about this need since the day he got here, and I think you're absolutely right, Member Vollendorf. You know, it's the same reason why we changed marijuana to cannabis. You know, so this is what we should be doing, and I think this is, you know, I'm really impressed by the in-depth historic look that Mr. Jacobs is taking here. In our conversation yesterday, it's important to understand the environment in which these things were created.
Yeah.
It'll help us today in weighing what we want to do and the value of these things when you see where they came from and the really problematic nature of a lot of it. That, you know, that's true for, I would say, every marginalized group in society. If you went back to look at these rules and regulations and laws that could have been just kicked along for decades and decades, you know, long before 2001. And so, you know, I think that's the right approach, is to go back to the root and see where it came from. I think that's really important for all of us to understand, and not just on this one, but when we have others that impact marginalized communities, it's super important. So I think we're all on the same page with that.
Yeah, just one final comment, and that is that we have changed our name to the Liquor and Cannabis Board, 10, 12 years ago, and people still refer to us as the Liquor Control Board periodically. And it's not a wonder when you look at our wax, and the Liquor Control Board is written all through those wax still in various places. So again, I think I've made my point.
Yes. And we will be sure that in each of these efforts we do that, but also look at that broader effort. And we, you know, and we've also talked not just the need to update that kind of outdated language, but to look at our cannabis regulations as well, which are a very different world today than they were 10 years ago, and what there can be changed so it doesn't become one of these dinosaurs that we all look at 20 years from now and go, why is that still there? And so, you know, putting that into more real time, I think is the right approach. I think you're absolutely right, Member Vollendorf. So, okay. Thanks, Mr. Jacobs. Really appreciate that. And you will brief us again Tuesday of next week, specifically for what we're going to act on Wednesday.
Yes. Yeah, okay. I'll be doing another briefing on Tuesday during caucus, and then on Wednesday at the board meeting, I'll be submitting and requesting approval of the 101.
And we still need to discuss at some point the petitions. I'll just tell you my opinion is we should just accept them as soon as we can, because we're all doing that work anyhow. But you know, we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. Okay. Great.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Daniel.
Really appreciate it.
All right, thanks so
All right,
much.
that takes us to the last item, which is board member and executive assistant reports. Anything from anybody? No? Okay. With that, we're adjourned. We'll be back next Tuesday at 10 a.m.
Thank you. Good discussion.